with you. So before I was Director of Research, in about, I want to say 2017, we took on a project funded by what was then DFID, now FCDO, that's the UK version of USAID, on citizen security. It was a project called Citizen Security IAD, and it was a multi-study, I want to say 3-4 year project covering many different aspects of citizen security in Jamaica. And this was a little unusual for two reasons. One is that there had not been a broad project like that, research project like that, about citizen security in Jamaica, which might seem a bit surprising because it's our #1 issue, but it hadn't happened yet. And the other thing that was surprising about it was that CAPRI had never done citizen security work before. And they took this project on. I say they because I wasn't there at the time. So when I joined CAPRI in the following year, I met this project, and I met a draft report of 0 murders in Augusttown and what were the secrets to how Augusttown achieved 0 murders, which the conventional wisdom that it was the wide range and many years of social interventions that had finally yielded success. I met a report on scamming in Montego Bay. I met a report on police reform. And we hadn't yet started, but there was one more study to be done, which ended up being the gang study, Guns Out. I am not a criminologist. I'm not a security person. No experience in anything security related. So I came to the topic completely as a complete neophyte, complete blank slate. And I had the capable researcher of Joanna Callan, who is now with the JCF, to basically the two of us essentially took over that project. And we ended up producing, I can't say we produced a police reform report because that was already almost completed. That was one that Professor Harriet did. But we ended up completing, basically redoing everything that I had met. 3 reports that I'm extremely proud of to this day. The last one was launched right here at Terra Nova in February 2020. That was our last live event like this up until last year when we had the budget launch. You know, it's a very difficult thing for any think tank to say that their report or their finding led to some kind of a policy change or outcome. But CAPRI's a little unusual in that regard, in part because Jamaica is such a small space politically and socially. We can actually see sometimes things that in a bigger space like Canada, North America, UK, you might not be able to see kind of how the thing shifts and how the dynamics play out. And I don't think we would ever say that our report brought about X or Y change, but I do think that there are reports that have certainly contributed substantially to policy domains. And I think our last report, in the 4 years since the last report was launched, we have received enough feedback and seen enough for ourselves to feel satisfied that the reports are not only methodologically sound, but also have contributed to at least informing those policy domains, specifically to scamming, to gangs, and to social interventions. I know that Aleem is going to speak a bit to the impact of the 0 murders report in his opening remarks, so I won't say much more about that. But essentially, out of those 3 reports, kind of a fire was lit. Not only in the discourse around social interventions and some of the other issues that we had been treating with, but also within us as an organization. We wanted to know more, we wanted to do more. We realized that there were a lot of unanswered questions, that there had not been, in another scenario, you might imagine that a public policy issue as important as security is in Jamaica, that you would have research reports coming out left, right, and center from all sorts of different organizations, from academia, from other think tanks if they existed, from advocacy organizations, from civil society. So we realized that there was a vacuum of evidence-based thinking, research, and analysis on these very, very important problems. And with the support of the EU largely, who are the supporters of this report, one of CAPRI's most steadfast supporters since its inception 16 years ago, we have been able to do more work in this area. This report being one of them in this current EU project that we have. We have 3 more reports that are citizen security related, again, all coming from those original reports. And then we have a whole other project, a whole other 3-year project, which is ostensibly about urban youth governance and technology. But together with our consortium partners, some of whom are here, /Roots, Mona GIS, and Fight for Peace, we decided to use the opportunity of that project to look at what we think are some of the core issues that we need to grapple with if we're going to resolve some of these security issues. Some of them are not so obvious. They all pertain to urban youth, technology, and governance. But it's a 3-year project, 6 studies, funded by a Swiss foundation, the first time we're ever partnering with that organization. And it's going to give us the opportunity to do some much more granular research on and in the communities that are called vulnerable communities or volatile communities, and how the people who are in these communities are grappling with the challenges that they're facing every day, and what policy solutions can be derived from evidence-based research to try and solve some of these long-standing problems that really we should not still be having to deal with. So that's a kind of background to how we come to be here today. This study, as I said, is the first of 4 in this EU project, and then there's the other 6 in the One City project, which we're going to be launching later on down in the year, and which I hope you will also all join us for. So I've gotten the signal that I have bought enough time by yabbering on. So I will actually turn over to Aleem, who is the lead researcher on the One City project, to actually get the proceedings going.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we're about to kick things off tonight. Before we begin, can I ask that those present kindly move to the front if you can, to accommodate those who might be arriving late due to the inclement weather. I think we're going to begin with a video first.
Having reasonable cause to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence and murder, and the threat to the rule of law and public order, I have officially declared the first zone of special security and community development operations under the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017.
6 years have passed since the Andrew Holness-led administration declared the first Zones of Special Operations, ZOSOs. Since then, ZOSOs have been implemented in 7 communities across the island, identified as violent hotspots. These communities are Mount Salem, Norwood, Greenwich Town, Denham Town, Parade Gardens, and Seven Alamar.
We have gangs because we allow gangs.
Formality actually is one of the great safeguards against crime.
It feels like that watchful eye that's always present.
Unstable is a word used by residents to describe what these communities were before the implementation of the ZOSOs.
Right before ZOSO was implemented, I remember there was a string of shootings. I think around 14 persons were injured in the space of one day. It was crazy. Children weren't able to go to school. If they were at school, early dismissal. You couldn't go out on the street without being worried about being caught up in a drive-by or just a random shooting. A lot of persons were just unhappy and weren't able to relax or even be productive.
Everybody was, I for one, was wondering what is the whole idea, if it's going to happen, take over by the army. Yes. But afterward, after a week, things gradually started to change. One is that the community on its own started to calm down. It was like, it was at a boiling point, and then it wasn't cycled off, but it thrown down a whole lot.
We want Anatone Station, we want ZOSO.
Though residents were hesitant to accept the security forces in their communities, they are now grateful for their presence.
Honestly, if ZOSO hadn't come, I don't think we'd still have a Denham Town. At least not the Denham Town I'm living in now, because it's 100% better.
Now you have persons being able to take morning walks. They're now able to cycle. Recreation is now something that's ever present in the community.
While residents credit the ZOSOs for bringing a new sense of security to their communities, they do not believe the level of peace introduced by the security forces can be maintained without them.
The communities in and of themselves, they are still what they were in the sense of how they're segmented and how the areas are sectioned off. So they do offer some sort of incubation for crime. And with most instances, once you have the security measures being moved away, it offers the opportunity for a lot of criminals to kind of sneak their way back into the community. So I think that maintained security presence is definitely necessary, and I suggest that it continues for a longer period.
But having a maintained security presence in these communities will not solve the crime problem that they're faced with, as the informal nature of these communities breed criminality.
When you see squatter communities take root and grow, crime inevitably follows. Registered title to the land, ownership of the land, gives people something to invest in, something they can invest, they build communities, they protect their property, they have something that they can use as collateral, they have something they can pass on to their children. Formality actually is one of the great safeguards against crime.
So we have something called generational crime families, and we have generational poverty. But the generational crime family, a lot of times, is a victim of the family around them. We have a crisis of gangs, and the only way it's going to get rid of them is to have crisis legislation that allows for what some would consider draconian powers to end gangs after a generation of these measures, and that's what's really needed. Other things like land titles and so on will help you, but nothing quite as. It's not as that is nowhere as dramatic as what is required of this. I mean, that's a BB gun to a tank.
I want to share a perspective about CAPRI that we've never publicly highlighted before. My name is Ali Mahaber. I'm a research fellow at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, and I've been privy to a secret that we've kept under wraps, that is, until now. And it's this. We not only hope for a better future, we aim to make it a reality by purposefully developing policy reports that will shake up the status quo. It will drive real transformative changes that we can see taking place. Take, for instance, our investigation into Jamaica's debt dilemma. It showed it wasn't excess spending that was the real cause of the problem, but rather public enterprises. And thanks to evidence-based, informed decisions inspired by our findings, Jamaica has now become a global poster child for fiscal recovery, halving its debt in just 10 years, an unprecedented feat. Or consider our critique of the National Housing Trust model, in which we showed the institution transferred wealth from the middle class, from the poor to the middle class. It has since reformed this model to be more equitable, and we believe our report played a significant role in that transformation. Then there was the Augustown report. We did not anticipate the effect it would have. Like always, we were just following the data and reporting the findings, and then boom. The discourse on anti-violence interventions was transformed by that report. More recently, there was the analysis of the perplexing issue of growthless jobs in Jamaica, where we pinpointed the cause of our high employment without corresponding economic growth, along with its implications for immigration policy. But I think this evening, we launch one of our most important and impactful reports ever. It brings a new perspective to an old problem as it proposes viable and feasible solutions to Jamaica's most pressing issue, its extraordinarily high murder rate. Before we get to the report, we are pleased to have Peter Petrovsky, charge d'affaires for the European Union to Jamaica, to get proceedings underway on behalf of the EU, which supported the research and production of this report. The EU is one of our most steadfast partners, and we are immensely grateful for their support that allows us to do this vital work. After this presentation, we will have a panel discussion. Members of the panel include Senior Superintendent of Police, SSP Michael Phipps, Commanding Officer of the Kingston Western Police Division. SSP Phipps boasts an MSc in National Security and Strategic Studies, complemented by a diploma in Criminal Justice from the FBI in the United States. Renowned for his commitment to community engagement, SSP Phipps has actively participated in numerous conflict resolution sessions with local schools, and his extensive experience includes dedicated efforts in fostering peaceful resolutions within communities such as Hannahtown, Denhamtown, and Tivoli Gardens. Also joining the panel is Dr. Jason Mackay, a criminologist and private security expert. He is CEO of Mackay Security and Investigative Services Limited, Jamaica. Dr. Mackay was awarded his PhD from Nova Southeastern University. He received training in the United States and Israel in SWAT, Special Weapons Attack Team operations, as well as in counter-terrorism and executive protection. He is also a graduate of the Sig Sauer Academy and serves on the Jamaica Constabulary Force in the Special Operations Unit. His other areas of expertise are in the disciplines of forensic investigation, having graduated from the Metropolitan Police Institute in Florida. He is also one of the few certified hostage negotiators residing in Jamaica, and he also holds a 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo. So, other panelists, watch out. Also joining the panel is Venetia Phillips, who brings experience far beyond her role as a former counselor for the Pepin Division. Her many years of work in Augustown and ZOSO community laid the foundation for her election to local government. Venetia has worked in Operation Pride, served as parish manager for Kingston and St. Andrew, as well as Montego Bay, and has invaluable experience in the civil and criminal courts. She holds an LLB with honors and is currently pursuing advanced criminological studies at Anglia Ruskin University, focusing on serious crime, violence prevention, social control, and policing transnational crime. So all three panelists share deep knowledge and rich on-the-ground experience. So we are very pleased to have all of them share their expertise in the ensuing discussion. They will be joined by Alexander Carswell, the lead author of the report, and the discussion will be moderated by Diana Torburn, CAPRI's Director of Research, who supervises the study. You, our valued audience, members both in person and online, will have the opportunity to participate in discussion using our app called Slido, and we're going to provide more details on how to engage when the mic turns over to the next speaker. So I won't give any spoilers to the presentation that the lead researcher, Alexander Carswell, is going to make this evening. and I won't preempt what I anticipate will be an informed and perhaps very spicy discussion of the findings, but I'm going to say this. Right now in Jamaica, we stand in front of a policy window, and we have some really tough decisions about how to go about solving the issue of armed violence. But we know this report can contribute to carrying the country through that policy window into a new, better reality. Just as Jamaica is a poster child for having its public debt, we believe that this report offers practical, feasible policy actions that can have our murder rate in an even shorter space of time. So let the next Financial Times, Brookings Institution report, World Bank report on Jamaica be the story about how we brought our murder rate down in a remarkably short space of time without violating human rights, without imperiling our democratic institutions and all the good that comes from that. So when you hear future podcasts, radio programs, news reports discussing this future success story, you can smile to yourself knowing that you were here when CAPRI launched the report that started it all. I now welcome our lead researcher, Alexander Coswell.
I don't need to stay up there, but good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out. And especially thank you for braving the traffic and the rain. I don't know how that must have been. So, in January 2021, I was sitting in on the Joint Select Committee to review the law reform legislation that instituted ZOSOs in 2017. During that meeting, the committee members took presentations from state agencies that carry out the operations under ZOSOs. After the presentation by the Social Development Commission, which is the body in charge of overseeing social interventions in ZOSOs aimed at behavior change, initiatives like poverty reduction programs, educational programs, temporary employment programs. After that presentation, two issues seemed to frustrate the discussion among the committee members. The first was how about the struggle to make progress with the social interventions that target behavior change of the people in these communities, or even to establish clear indicators of behavior change. The second issue was, how will we know when a ZOSO is successful and thus allow the government to bring it to a close? The response from the Social Development Commission seemed to take members of the committee aback, because they estimate that for a ZOSO to have any noticeable effect on the behavior of the residents in the communities as regards to violence, it would need to last 6 years. Any effect. For the ZOSO to have the effect we want out of the intervention, it would need to last 20 years, each ZOSO. Now, that took the committee members aback. And I think it's because they did some quick maths in their heads. And they realized that, say, 50 communities around the country need a ZOSO. And each one lasts 20 years. And we don't have the capacity to do them all at the same time. Then, this amounts to trying to raise a new generation in each community. This approach will lead us to we'll be doing ZOSOs for centuries. I think something's going on here. This is not sustainable. Now, but the response hints at the flawed theory of change that underpins ZOSOs. ZOSOs are based on a clear hold and build strategy, which derives from counterinsurgency theory. And that's based on the recognition by policymakers and analysts that most violence in Jamaica is driven by gangs. These gangs largely take up operational bases in safe haven communities that support the gangs. And this relationship between the gangs and their safe haven communities makes them analogous to insurgencies. As insurgent groups, in the context of a civil war, depend on populations to support them. This is why a counterinsurgency strategy aims at driving a wedge between populations and the insurgents, and to thus remove the safe havens from those armed groups. It also means that the violence from an insurgency, or in our case a gang, is concentrated around those safe haven communities. The National Security Policy of 2013 explicitly likens Jamaica's gang situation to an insurgency. And it refers to, it casts Jamaica's over 700 informal communities as the safe havens in which gangs take root. Our analysis confirms that armed violence is indeed concentrated around Jamaica's informal communities, specifically the urban informal communities. The goal then is to eliminate the safe havens so that gangs can no longer operate and cause the havoc that they do. Now, the National Security Policy of 2013 recommends a particular approach to ZOSOs, what's called the population-centric approach. This is more popularly known as winning hearts and minds. The idea is to provide social services and community development measures in order to win over the population so that they stop supporting the gangs and start supporting the state instead. That idea also coincides with the long-standing and entrenched view among civil society that socioeconomic deficits are the reasons for Jamaica's high levels of violence. Issues like, we've long believed that issues like poverty or lack of economic opportunities or lack of education lead to our high levels of violence. And thus, alleviating that with social interventions is the cure. The first problem is with the hearts and minds model. Hearts and minds doesn't work. It has never worked in any kind of counterinsurgency operation campaign across the world. Biggest profile counterinsurgency intervention was the war in Afghanistan, during which NATO countries, over 20 years, pumped trillions of dollars into development programs into Afghanistan to win support for the local government. And that all came to nothing when NATO pulled out in 2021 and the Taliban retook the country. This approach also doesn't work when you apply it to gangs. Rio de Janeiro, since 2008, has tried the population-centric clear hold and build approach to combat the gangs that inhabit the favelas. And in 2015, when the city ran out of money and had to withdraw security forces from these communities, the gangs simply returned and violence rose again. The Brazilians also tried this in Haiti when they led the UN peacekeeping mission in Haiti for 17 years. They applied the population-centric winning hearts and minds approach. And they managed to suppress gangs for a time. But now we're seeing the end result of that. Gangs have reemerged and they're holding the entire country hostage. The second issue is we have enough research on violence in Jamaica and in other countries around the world to know that there is no causal link between poverty or lack of education or lack of employment opportunities and high levels of violence. But the overarching problem is that this approach does not give enough credit to the political and environmental advantages that gangs have in informal communities. These communities are often comprised of extended family networks that have lived in the same spot for generations. That creates a natural loyalty out of kinship. The gang members are their brothers, their cousins, their fathers, their uncles. Moreover, that loyalty is often reinforced with a level of terror and intimidation that the state cannot match and should not match. The terrain also provides an advantage because the informality of these communities means they're built in a haphazard manner, not conforming to building regulations or codes. And that haphazard layout and lack of access points to the community cuts them off from mainstream society and makes them difficult to police. This provides a tactical edge to gangs over security forces. Successful counterinsurgencies do not win by winning hearts and minds. They succeed by bringing order to undergoverned spaces. What that means in the Jamaican context is actually simple. Conceptually simple. How do you bring order to an informal community? You formalize it. What that means in practice is that security forces have to continue their aggressive anti-gang operations, which is yielding success in the short term. And as we can see, violence has taken a slight dip. But the security operations are also useful for creating a safe environment for civilian contractors and state agencies to do the real work of mitigating the problem. Real work such as the infrastructure upgrading that we need to do in these communities. There's already infrastructure work ongoing in ZOSOs, but this mainly comprises paving roads, removing zinc fences. But what really needs to happen is the layout of these informal communities need to be regularized such that informal communities start to resemble formal areas. This is to be accompanied by infrastructure work to regularize light connections and water connections in these areas. But what makes an informal community informal is the irregular land tenure of the place. And so the key strategy, the key prong of a successful strategy will encompass what we call land tenure regularization. This is an umbrella term for three activities. One is the titling of land across the country in communities where we are able to title it. And 600,000 Jamaicans, 20% of the population, live in informal communities across the land. Many of these, probably the vast majority of these, are in areas that can be titled. But you also need to think about the areas that can't be titled. Communities that inhabit environmentally hazardous locations. These communities need to be relocated for their own safety, because we cannot continue to allow them to live in these areas. It also means being vigilant about the prevention of new illegal settlements, which often pop up here and there. Now, land tenure is the key to success in formalizing informal communities because it will lead to residential mobility. As I mentioned, many of these areas, families have lived in the same community for generations. But Providing people with land titles allows them to trade their holdings on the formal real estate market and allows people to move places, people to move out and new members to buy in. That change from a homogeneous community to a heterogeneous community will undermine the political advantages of gangs in these areas. It will also lead to greater social integration of these marginalized communities into mainstream society. And we don't have to focus on winning hearts and minds if we can achieve that level of integration where the society absorbs the people in these communities. Regularizing land tenure will also lead or also provide for the mobilization of private real estate developers that will assist in the necessary infrastructure work as it is in their interest to develop these areas. This does not have to take 20 years. When Peru faced an internal conflict, land tenure regularization became one of the key elements of their strategy to resolve it. Between 1992 and 1994, Peru distributed 200,000 land titles to the people in the slums of its capital, Lima. 200,000 in 2 years. With advanced technology available to us for land surveying, Jamaica can accomplish this within one election cycle. We don't need to target behavior change. The goal here is community integration. So we recommend that the government switch strategy from one which targets population control or suasion to one which targets territorial control. And this is achieved by coordinating the elements of land tenure regularization, infrastructure upgrading, and security operations in each ZOSO area. It also means we need to deprioritize the social interventions. Now, what's the issue with social interventions? One is that, as I mentioned earlier, they don't get at the problem. The problem is what makes these communities safe havens for organized crime, and the problem of what motivates violent activity, what motivates these organizations to engage in violent activity. Two is that social interventions divert resources away from those initiatives, such as the infrastructure upgrading and the land tenure work, that could actually help solve the issue. But also, social interventions, the many social interventions that take place in informal communities, in ZOSO communities, add a level of operational complexity to ZOSOs that verges on paralysis and mission creep, extending the lifespan of a zone of special operation. We have to remember that we are in a competitive environment. The state is in competition with these armed groups for control of territory. And in a competition, actors evolve. And unless we apply maximum pressure, the gangs will simply evolve strategy, evolve tactics, and we will be living with this problem ad infinitum. If you want to eradicate a species, you don't just pick off the members one by one. You eliminate the environment in which it breeds. Victory is within our reach in the short term. Why would we settle for a long-term strategy? Thank you.
So in my learning about citizen security, I also became a military person in the progress of this report. I'd like to invite our panelists to join me here, and Alexander as well, and we will start the panel discussion. We are using Slido. It is an app that is very user-friendly. You go to slido.com and you enter event code CAPRI. There you can not only post your questions, but you can vote up other questions that you see that you would like to have answered. So it's quite democratic in that way. It also allows those of you who are watching online to participate in the Q&A because you can access the app wherever you are. However, if there are any of you who are here who would actually like to engage with us directly, please just put your name in the question, and then when I see it and it's been voted up, so make sure it's a good question, I will call on you, and we can actually have a proper face-to-face interaction with the Q&A. So I think that we have sorted out all the housekeeping, and I'm going to take a seat, and we will get started with the panel discussion. I think Aleem had already introduced everybody, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but I am going to pick up all my crouches. Oh, and not knock over flowers. Okay. So I'm going to do kind of a first order of business, which is to ask each of the panelists, excepting Alexander, to just give us a 2-minute what comes to your mind, having heard the presentation. And I know all of you have also read the report, which we do have copies of available. Obviously, the presentation didn't cover everything in the report. It just tried to cover the main points that we wanted to get across. But in 2 minutes, SSP FIPS, what comes to mind from the report and from the presentation?
All right. I basically got from the presentation that the whole concept of land tenure is a part of the wider scope of intervention. We have seen across most of our ZOSOs where land tenure have been introduced through our intervention committees. There were efforts made at giving land titles to residents, and this really caused most residents to take greater ownership of the communities that they reside in. If you look at some instances where we had zinc fencing removed and given walls and so on, we saw where the residents basically felt a deeper sense of pride in the area that they live. Can you imagine living in an area that they refer to as Drunkra Town, and that area has now changed its perspective in terms of the general structure? They have running water, they have electricity, they have all the different amenities that goes with communities that are really structured. So this caused persons to really show greater ownership and sort of owned the community and basically sought to expel the persons who were about giving bad names to the community. So I believe that the whole thing about land tenure will at least bring some acceptance of residents and citizens to engage in more in the interest of what grows the communities.
Ms. Phillips.
As I listened to the presentation, I had to chuckle a bit. Because when we think about ZOSO and the context in which we have been exposed to it, clear, hold, build. These are the veins, they say, of counter-insurgency strategy. It is an audacious desire, I must say, and a very difficult one to achieve. And so I'm happy that my friend Alexander indicated that it is a long way around, and it might be the losing way. That desire to win hearts and minds of those who support violence producers and gang members, that desire abides within mothers, fathers, partners in crime, and praise, yes, the people who are fearful. And so they're at a crossroads. work with the greater good or stand by those who they either fear or love. The reality is, the argument of land tenure has been raised as to whether or not that kind of sustainability, that kind of stake in the existing social order of communities will result in behavior change. Has it? I'm sure it hasn't. But it has its place. It has value because it gives them a stake. It instills pride. But I think our objective is to reduce violence. Our objective is to strengthen and restore order to communities. So I look forward to the discussion, but excellent work. Thank you, Alexander.
Dr. McKay, your 2 minutes.
Good evening. I think the report is an extremely good effort, and it does bring up the importance of property ownership and titling of the property you live in, and this is important for a variety of reasons, but primarily that you can access amenities that a lot of other persons would take for granted, like electricity, water, and so on. And then it also contributes to a wider infrastructural investment by the government when there is titled persons living there. So from that point of view, I think we hit something on the head there. Do I feel that it is the most important part of a ZOSO? No. I think the occupation is the most important part of a ZOSO and will continue being so even if they change the essence of the ZOSO and the targets of the ZOSO. You must remember that there is parts of ZOSO I've never really agreed with, and I've never believed that winning hearts and minds was necessary because the majority of the persons who live in these communities are not supportive of the gangs. They are simply a victim of the gangs. And you've won their hearts and minds from you arrive because as long as you're not abusing or ill-treating them, you're bringing peace to their communities. That's accepted. The fact is that culture, accepting gang rule, occurs because you've grown up and seeing gangs ruling. If you can spend enough time in a community as an occupied territory where you're treating persons with respect, and there's no abuse. There's also no violence by the gangs because they simply can't function. So the children grow up not seeing gangs with power. And when you stop accepting the gangs, then it's harder for them to continue even after. Even if they are powerful and capable of terror, it's because you're beaten already, because you've accepted the terror. And that's the problem, way ahead of any other issue. So, yes, I agree that being able to access land tenure, land titling, and so on will be a significant contributor. I don't think this can be the essence of ZOSO. And I don't think ZOSO can exist for a period that is not long enough to change the culture. And if you could just move from informal communities and think of communities that are formal, that have extremely high violence figures in historically Waterford. Waterford was a community created literally out of other communities coming under attack and the persons being moved there as refugees, Rosestone and so on. And if you look on the other communities in Portmore that were built after independence, they don't have the murder figures that Waterford have, whether before or after Vibes Cartel. So the fact is that it is the transference of that culture from the war-torn communities embedded there that allowed gang growth and gang development to take root in Waterford, despite everybody having a land title, everybody having electricity, and everybody having water. But I do commend Mr. Coswell for his insight. I mean, I agree that land tenurization has a big part in the plan going forward. And I do commend him on the report.
Okay, thank you. So there are lots of questions coming in, and they're very good questions. So I usually take advantage of this position and ask my own question first, but I'm going to go straight to these because they're very good questions. And I think this would be a good one for me to give Alexander a chance to give a first go at, but I'd really like to hear from everyone else their thoughts on the question, which is, what is the justification for deprioritizing social interventions aimed at behavior modification as opposed to pursuing both strategies?
Thanks for that question. Again, in any strategy, simplification is the key to success. Sorry, is this mic on? Yes. Any agent that you tack on to the strategy leads to operational complexity. Think of going to the beach. If you and your family want to go to the beach, you get in your car and you drive. If you want to coordinate a beach day with 20 other families, it's a bigger process. Unless you get one bus and you all go. If you coordinate, everybody has their own separate cars and you go. People are going to take stops. They're going to want to use the restroom. They're going to want to stop at the faith spend. It's not an issue anymore, but and it's going to take forever, and you'll get there in an extended period. Operational complexity. The more organizations you have involved in a campaign, and each ZOSO is a campaign, the more you're liable to that operational paralysis and that mission creep. The second thing is the behavior modification interventions don't get at the problem. We assume that, despite all the research saying that there's no connection between poverty and lack of economic opportunity and lack of education and violence, even if you set that aside for a second, that approach doesn't even give weight to the fact that we're not dealing with just individuals. We're dealing with organizations. Gangs are organizations, and organizations that behave rationally. They are pursuing their violent activities because it suits their interests. That is their business model. And they will continue to do so as long as they can recruit and conscript people largely from within these communities. And they can conscript them by force. And they're very good at recruiting people. So if you are doing an intervention targeting at-risk youth, you're going into an environment and competing with gangs that are experts at recruiting youth. And they can do it better than you can do it. And so that's why the behavior modification idea is not going to achieve the results we want. And that's why we have pumped how many millions of dollars? 300 and something billions of Jamaican dollars over 10 years in these kinds of interventions and have achieved nothing.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to put this to you, SSP Phipps. I know that you have also been involved directly, but also from an operational perspective. What do you say to the question of deprioritizing social interventions aimed at behavior modification?
All right, I wouldn't agree with that because based on our own experience in the ZOSO areas, we believe and have seen where the intervention around behavior modification, especially with the kids in school, where they are able to go back into the community and say to the parents that teacher said I must not do this, teacher said I must not do that, and so on. It brings something to the parents who want to see the children at least going right. So I believe that mostly in the ZOSOs, especially adults, they have no idea about conflict resolution and so on. Their behavior from very early out, because of the lack of maybe exposure to training around behavior modifications and so on, they don't know that there's a other way out. When you go into the communities and you sit and you try to reason with them, they will tell you that, how is it you're coming to say to me now that somebody who killed my father in front of me, how are you telling me now to forgive that person? So we believe that there is a real need for the behavior modification, especially those persons who have been victims of crimes or those who have seen their family members suffer as a result of the violence within these communities. So the behavior modification, I believe, should really be a priority in our efforts to really restore some normalcy and calm in these areas, especially the areas that are very high on crime.
Okay, all right. See if we didn't just invite people who are all going to agree with us. All right, Benicia, your thoughts on that question? Deprioritizing social interventions as opposed to pursuing both strategies. What's your say?
Whose behavior are we trying to modify? I think I'm one of the longest voices in terms of deprioritizing social intervention. Why? We often in Jamaica speak to social intervention as if it is a singular activity. It's actually a process. It's more like a teething process. Crime must be separated from violence. Crime is a social derivative. Violence isn't, though it can be impacted and supported by crime, because you can have crime without violence. And so the reality is that violence comes from various objectives of those who pursue violence. And so if economics is at the heart of that, then social intervention will fail. I believe that we have to look at all the situations as they present themselves, and then we have to apply the prescription based on the situation we're confronted with. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So it cannot be that every time we're confronted with crime and violence heightened in communities, that the rush is to social intervention. We have to understand the conflict in order to apply the prescriptive. I believe that we have tried, and in many ways we have failed. Many will not want to accept that social intervention, the way we have applied it in Jamaica, has failed. And so I believe we probably need to look at other priorities, look at the perpetrators, look at what motivates them, and then we apply the prescriptive. But I believe that it is necessary to deprioritize social intervention, certainly in the way that we have gone about it.
Jason, your thoughts?
Well, firstly, you have to, before you even visit, social intervention, just to get a framework of how the part it plays. Gangs make up an extremely small number, statistically speaking, of any community that they operate in. So they are literally a parasite on the community that preys on the community. So the majority of those persons who are in those gangs come from what we call traditional gang families. It is the same tenement yard that is producing the same gangsters generation after generation. There are persons I'm arresting now, I arrested their grandparent. So it is, because I've been around decades in the same communities. So they literally keep on being produced by the same yard. That type of indoctrination that anybody who's brought up in that type of setting is going to create a gangster. Now, will social intervention change that person who's been indoctrinated by that small space influence? No, it won't. However, you see, in order for gangs to function and to flourish, they need a playground to play on. And it is the lack of social infrastructure, it is the lack of a community that is able to be policed, it is the large abundance of persons who are not in circumstances that allow them to actually attend school regularly in a supervised way, and anywhere that actually give you the additional numbers that the gang needs and recruits from, which is why you can't abandon social intervention. It has to be part of the plan, but you have to understand that the social intervention will never target the core gang group, because they're coming out of an indoctrinated environment. What it does is it affects the playground that brings in the ambient members that grows the numbers. And these numbers are important, because if, from putting on my police officer's hat now, if you're going into a community and you're going up against 3 or 4 men versus 14 men, maybe only 4 are hardcore gang members, but they bring in the other ones that are literally victims of the lack of infrastructure that have been provided in their life. And then that is now what builds on that. And then you create new gang households that last for generations and generations, which is why I believe ZOSO is a success. Because ZOSO has an occupation situation that takes away the playground. In a similar way that social intervention assists in taking away the playground, but you have to have both components involved. So I don't agree with the removal of social intervention in a ZOSO, nor do I agree with a short-term ZOSO, nor do I agree with a ZOSO that doesn't have a strong paramilitary occupation. Thank you. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Alexander, you wanted to say?
Yes. So I would like us, I want us to get to a place where we stop talking about these communities as if they're set in stone by nature, as if they're static by nature. Right? Jason talked about he arrested somebody and after arresting his grandfather years before in the same community. That's not normal. It's not as normal that there's intergenerational gang families. It's not normal that people inhabit the same community for 3, 4, 5 generations. I mean, I was talking to I won't mention his name, but a high-level stakeholder in the security forces. And he referred to a gang war in Denham Town that has been going on since the 60s, involving the same family. In that time, my family has moved several. We don't live in the same parish. I don't live in the same community as my parents. They don't live in the same community as their parents, much less the same parish. And I hazard a guess that's the case with everybody here, almost everybody here. They're static because they can't move. They're trapped. They're trapped because they can't move with the capital, that land that is with them. They can't sell and move out. Nobody can buy and move in. So that you find these communities are like tide pools on the edges of an ocean. And we are talking about making them slightly better tide pools when we can bring them into the ocean by increasing their residential mobility. And that takes regularization of land tenure.
Well, I do encourage you to go on Slido and vote up questions, because I'm going to jump ahead to some of the questions with more votes, to questions with a few less votes, because I think this will follow directly from what we've just been discussing here and the points that have been raised, which is about this idea that changing communities through land tenure regularization can disrupt violence producers. And so there are a couple of questions. I'm going to try and combine them. In the process of formalizing communities, what happens after improving land tenure? And how can social interventions contribute to formalizing these communities? A kind of follow-on to that is this description of heterogeneity that land tenureship could bring sounds like gentrification. Does this risk merely displacing balance-enabling environments? And then the last related one, so I'm tying them all together, and then I'm going to put it to each of you to figure out how to answer it, is if the solution is land tenure, then the people who live in these communities, how will they be uplifted beyond simply having a title to their land? And who will fund the purchasing of these lands to grant tenure to the people who live on them? So again, because Alexander was the author of the report, I'm going to give him a first shot and also give the others a chance to formulate their thoughts on it.
Okay, what's the first one?
Well, I think the basic thrust of the question is, how is this proposal of land tenure regularization going to resolve these problems of violence? At the same time as, how is this process not going to be simply another way of saying we're going to gentrify these communities?
Okay. A simple way of putting what I'm proposing is, how do we, sorry to call it a community of Venetia, but how do we make Augustown like Mona Heights? They are 1.5 kilometers away from each other. I measured it using Google Maps. All right? You have one community, formal. Right? Another community, formal, no gangs. If if a murder occurs in Mona Heights, we'll hear about it for 6 months. It'll be a media storm. All right? Murders happen in Augustown almost every week. All right? I know it's run of the mill. It's mundane for us. And they are right beside each other. How do we make Augustown like Mona Heights? People who live in Mona Heights move in and move out. It changes constantly. Some people are long-term residents, but they have the ability to move in and move out at their will, according to their interests. People in Augustown don't have that ability. It's not that easy. What we're talking about is giving them the same freedoms that the people in Mona Heights enjoy. What they choose to do with that is going to be within their interests. It allows them to sell and move out if they wish. It also allows them the ability to take that land title to the bank and use that as collateral that they can use to access the financial system and invest in themselves and their families' futures, invest in their businesses if they want. We also know from empirical evidence from other places that land titling is associated with a lot of other goods. Again, Peru did a national land titling strategy, so we have a lot of studies coming out of there. And what the situation of Peru showed was that not only did land titling improve access to the financial system of residents and improve property values and allowed them to move at will, but it also changes the family dynamic of the community. When you're in an informal community, you have to spend adult time essentially guarding your holdings, because the state doesn't guard it for you. All right? Or rather, you might pay a gang to do it. All right? That time could be spent in productive work hours. So one of the things that was a surprising finding out of Peru is that distributing land titles to informal communities actually increased engagement in the formal work sector, because the people had more time to contribute to work. And we are in a state now where we have full employment, and we have no growth or little growth, because we have over 300,000 people who, for some reason or another, do not want to, or they're not looking for work, not engaged in the labor force at all. I don't think it's a coincidence that we have such a high proportion of the population, 20% of the population live in informal communities, and that we have such a high proportion of the population who are not engaged in the either informal or formal work set, employment. So when we document in the reports, and I encourage you to read it, that this is not only conducive to the strategic success against organized violence in Jamaica, but it's also conducive to the human development of the people in these communities. Their socioeconomic development. Many of the things we hope to achieve through social interventions, many of the outcomes we hope to achieve in terms of human capacity development, can be achieved by simply fixing the structural situation that underlies these communities and giving these people a better shot at life.
Okay. SSP Phipps, putting this one to you. How does this proposal of regularizing land tenure in these communities lead to these shifts that the proposal claims to make, in your view, especially given your experience with where you saw residents who received titles to their lands? And how do we prevent, or if we want to prevent, what do we say to the concerns about these communities becoming gentrified?
All right. The real truth is that unstructured or informal communities does not enhance quality policing. We have found that where communities have the right structure in terms of roadways and different utilities and so on, we are able to easier access these communities and to meet with people, have discussions around these community issues and so on. Put yourself in a situation where there is this informal settlement, and there is the need for some urgent police services, but you're not able to respond because there is no street names, there is no street to take the unit that you're traveling into these communities. So it takes away from the effectiveness of your police responses. We believe too that when the community is formalized, you get better cooperation from the residents. People in formalized communities want to ensure that their investment on their properties appreciates by the minute. They don't want to know that at a later date they can't use a house to maybe gain a loan, or if you go and say you're from a particular informal settlement, you are denied a job opportunity, and so on. So we believe that structured and formalized communities, it creates for better infrastructures in terms of development. You can go in, you can do your different census taking, you can look at whether or not persons who might be named on the jury list, if those persons can be located for you to have them attend courts and be part of a jury system. You heard recently, I think, where they could not find enough jurors to basically start a particular murder trial in the circuit court. We believe that if we add structured communities, when we got the name of a person, and not just to say back a wall or a community like that, but to say then 37 Perry Street, 38 Harris Street, and so on, we would know exactly where to go. So I am always of the thinking that formalized communities will allow for better development of these communities, because communities that are informal, nobody is going to come in and do any form of investment in these communities. And there are policies that are influenced by what occurs in communities. And if there is no way of finding out total population, who live where, different families, and so on, we are at a standstill. We're not going to move forward. So I believe that formalization of these communities is very important, especially to our policing efforts, considering that the aim of the ZOSO basically is to have communities formalized, where we can rid them of the gangsters, we can continue to keep them out of the areas, and at the same time encourages and helps citizens to develop in these areas. We want to know that particular communities within the ZOSOs can have lasting prosperity in terms of peace within the areas, and of course knowing that they have proper addresses, can be located, and they can benefit from government policies that are influenced by information that they have garnered from these areas.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to put it to you directly, Venicio. Augusttown and Mona Heights. Can it happen? Can we get there? Is Augusttown at risk of being gentrified if we try?
It can happen. It's a work in progress, but bad cultures are hard to break. It's a reality that we really must face. The truth is, if you like eating chocolate, even though doctors tell you that all your teeth, they're decaying, you're going to hide and eat chocolate because there's an appetite for it. In communities plagued by the kind of violence we see, and, gangbangers operating, there's an appetite for it as well. That appetite is often supported by various social systems, the political system, different systems within the communities, and family members who are dependent on these guys as their means of subsistence. And so that is what makes it more challenging. Land security and, security of tenure plays a critical role. It does give a sense of pride, as I said earlier. But does it really truly impact violence and violence producers in the way that we would like? We're not seeing that now. It may, in terms of the results we yield, vary from community to community, because the culture in one community may be very distinctly different from another. So what obtains in Norwood, for example, would not necessarily fit if you were to put that in Augustown. And so I've seen attempts to change the aesthetics, to improve the physical infrastructure, but it's the social that we have the critical problem with. That's the cancer that we need to treat. Now, I believe that we have to disaggregate community members. We have to target those persons who are more impressionable, the grandmothers, the mothers, the baby mothers. Notice I'm speaking to mothers because I believe we are discounting the role of women in what we are facing in terms of the criminal patterns and heightened criminal behavior in Jamaica. It can happen. It will happen. I have hope that it will happen in our lifetime too. But it will take consistency in the hold phase of programs like ZOSO. You have to occupy space. I worry about displacement from that occupation because it moves the problems to other areas. So that is something we also need to look at how we prescribe for that based on the culture, and we have to track their movements. Criminal patterns and behavior changes daily. Our systems must remain relevant to keep up and to keep a pace with those changes. But it can happen. I believe that all the engines of the community, but more so the focus on the women, has to be brought into the framework in a serious way. Even if we have to make sure they understand that even sanctions, yes, because it will not just be hand-holding, that even sanctions may very well be possible. Help them to understand the implications of what they're supporting so that we can actually see real culture change. Real culture change in communities actually is nestled at the feet of our women.
Well, I didn't intend to say this, but our next study under this EU project is on women in crime. So there you go. Jason, Alexander talks about Mona Heights and Augustown, but I've heard you talk about Portmore Villa, and it seems like a similar situation. Could you maybe speak to that in answering this question about how land tenure could actually lead to a reduction in violence, and maybe the question of gentrification, if you can?
Actually, one of the situations that support Alexander's theory, in the sense that you had Lesser Portmore, which was what the community was known as back in the 90s. And then when Operation Pride became very active, there was a section of Lesser Portmore that became Portmore Villas, where persons were able to purchase the land that they had squatted on. But then before they actually got to everybody, Operation Pride was removed. And you have a section now there called Gulf, which is a total squatter community. There is literally no violence in Portmore Villas. There is significant violence in Gulf. There is significant gang activity, gang governance, and gang membership in Gulf. Almost none in Portmore Villas. So, and they're right there beside each other. There were one community that now they've cut in two. So you have the zinc and the wooden houses and the no roads, no light, no water in this, and then literally a spin bowler bowls right across the road, and you're in Portmore Villas that may become a victim of this violence from time to time, but they don't have the membership there. The membership lives in Gulf, in the depressed areas. So, which is why I said there is a place for that, but then you have to look on the details of Lesser Portmore and what happened. It's the ones that could afford it that became Portmore Villas, and the ones who were in a position to maybe luckily in the line where they were able to buy their piece and so on. And then, you know, how Portmore Villas grew because persons in Lesser Portmore who could not purchase the land just basically migrated across the road into the capture land part of it, you know, and the less developed part of it. So, and that also is a factor. It still comes down to that if you look under the criminal influence back in from Lesser Portmore days, it's the same guy. And the person's committing the crime and making up the gang membership, although he lives in a foreign country now, are persons who are connected to his family. So it's anywhere, even if you had given them a house in Portmore Villas, that family is going to continue producing gang members no matter what you do. And I think that is the issue with it, is that where all of these things is underpinning the importance of small space influences and the small pockets of families in these informal and formal settlements that continue to fuel the gangs. And that, I think, is perhaps the most important factor. But it is a good demonstration, if you look at it holistically, how one community, divided in two by land titles, can become non-violent and the other one significantly violent.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, we're now going to take a question from the floor, and I saw someone. Yes, please. No, not on yet. Hold on. Give it a second so we can hear you properly.
Yes, my position is that violence is directly proportional to corruption, particularly in government agency. All that I've been hearing is that the only person who is committing crime and doing things is some poor persons. Right? If Jamaica established a fair system that you start from the top and you prosecute it and you take it serious, people will understand when you're trying to set up ZOSO in their community. I'm glad to see Mr. Phipps from West Kingston.
Yes, it is.
Now, and one of the other things is that how we use the money of the state and we're wasting it. When somebody tried to explain that you can renovate a building for $1 billion, I expect you to swallow it. And the people on the corner are talking about it. Then I wonder, how much money we have? Right? Are the youth some have to buy a Guinness and contribute to that amount? Now, in Anatown, the police are in the rain right now. Soldiers sitting beside Anatown police station. It came on that presentation that you made. That the people want back a police station that was burnt down. And nothing there. The people came out. It's a small clip, but I thought they mentioned Anatown. And you buy a bathroom, you buy a portable toilet. And the amount they pay for that is more than fixing up the Anatown police station. No, when people say that, they must think that we are joking.
Yeah, no, I think you're raising some very good points, and we are coming to the end of this section of the presentation. I'm told one more question from the floor, and then we'll take both of them, and I'll give the wrap-up question as well.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Regrettably, I didn't have a chance to read the full presentation and research. But as I heard the discussions, I kind of felt compelled to say something. And I think there are some of the issues that have been raised, certainly by Mr. Phipps, are matters that we've been talking about for years. Zinc fence, the need to assist in the process of policing, being able to locate persons by a fixed address and this kind of thing. Also, for the safety of the police. One of the things I've, however, not heard is the impact of zones of special operation on the human rights of persons who will live in these communities. Zones, or we call them ZOSOs, apparently that is a friendlier expression, and I hear about territorial occupation. Reminds me of the war that I see from time to time on my television of Israel really being in occupation of Palestinian and Gaza and Palestinian lands. So I really want us, whenever we talk about crime and violence in the communities, and security operations that are necessary, especially when there are heightened states of violence. We need to look at the legislative interventions, and there can be no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that the law reform, zones of special operation, do impact, the provisions do impact severely the human rights of citizens who live in occupied territory. In fact, it is a competing organization to an SOE. And what we're effectively talking about is the failure of the state in many areas to provide adequate services for people. Because when we talk about, for instance, the difference between Mona Heights and Augustown, many of us here historically know how Mona Heights started. But you know, so we're looking at broad social issues. And I agree with the speaker before me. It's a small group of persons who commit crime that impact all of us. And the key for me is to find those persons and bring them to justice, rather than have, as I have seen, human suffering by virtue of state occupation, and I'm using the words I've heard used by the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So because of time, I'm going to take the opportunity to combine some of the sentiments from the two people who shared with us their ideas and their thoughts to pose a final question to each of you. And I'm going to do it in a little bit reverse order, which is, and it also reflects on the questions that came up in the Slido about, let's say the government were to receive this proposal and you were advisor to the government in what should the first and next step be. Jason, what would your advice to the minister, Prime Minister, National Security Council be to say, let's move forward with this. This is the first thing we need to do.
Well, the essence of this report is land tenurization. It's allowing persons to have titles for the land. Well, it has to be possible, first of all. A lot of the land is historically captured land, has not necessarily been paid for. But there is methodologies to get past that and to ensure payment takes place over a period of time. I would encourage it to be one of the tools in the toolbox used to bring about change in informal communities. I certainly would. Mm-hmm. But I would not make it the essence of the essential tool. Mm-hmm. I still believe the tool is occupation, because occupation protects the community from a very small minority of gangs. So the occupation is necessary, and I don't believe that the occupation is necessarily there to step on persons' human rights. It is to protect persons' lives. Mm-hmm. And I think ZOSO, as far as my studies and my observation has done a good job in that respect, and has changed the approach of typical occupations in the past by actually occupying peacefully, engaging the community, no brutality, none of that type of thing. And that has to be what is important in it, is that you do things while you hold, but the hold is the most important thing. Thank you.
SSP Phipps, Commissioner says, I watched the presentation on YouTube and I'm convinced. What am I to do next?
All right. I would say basically that the whole question of land tenure is just a part of a toolbox that will aid in fixing informal communities. I believe that, yes, land tenure will bring things like it will in some way disrupt the cycle of violence. It will enhance security. It will promote some economic opportunities, and it will provide for integration of marginalized areas into the national fabric. But that cannot be a standalone. There are many other aspects to the intervention process that we will have to look towards. But this, of course, can be one of the main points that we can look at as a start. But I suggest that there are many other situations that we'll have to treat with, because this cannot be a standalone thing. It has to be complemented by many, many other situations.
Oh. Well, I did say we had run out of time. So. Okay.
Yes. So the whole question is that land tenure alone cannot do it. We need it to be complemented by a myriad of other things. And part of the whole culture change and so on has to be a part of the whole thing. How do we achieve the culture change? We have to go in the schools, we have to go in the communities, we have to make sure that conflict resolution is a very important part of how we go forward, because what you find is that we are grappling with the whole question of why is it that you will have a community and it takes one simple incident to really put the entire community on edge. Why is it we are not able to resolve our differences without resorting to violence or the killing and so on? Why is it we can't do that? Because we are not cultured in a way where we understand that we can resolve our differences without the violence. We need to establish groups within communities where we can have regular interactions. From the perspective of maybe a Kingston Western situation, it is ideal for us to go into the communities and try to find out why is it that particular communities are constantly at war with each other. Oftentimes the main players, they have no idea what is it they are warring for. But they will tell you that it's a part of the system. What is that system? Can land tenure define that system? No. It has to take a lot more intervention, get into the root of what are the issues that give rise to crime and deal with them directly. So land tenure, I suggest, is just one of that particular avenue that will lead to long-lasting peace in communities. But it is not going to happen as a standalone.
Okay. Ms. Phillips, now that you apparently have the Prime Minister's ear, what are you going to tell him is the first thing that needs to be done?
Mr. Prime Minister, deliberate attention to the formalization of informal communities is something that I believe is impatient of debate. However, that must operate simultaneously with the hold phase of the ZOSO. Occupation is critical. It is important that the people who are there feel a sense of security and safety. And then we have to tackle culture change. It is hard to hear, but I saw my good friend and pastor walk in, who is also a member of the security forces, and he will explain to you what the Bible meant by separating the wheat from the tares. In communities where we have persons who are committed to bringing communities to its knees, they must be separated from those persons who have that abiding faith that Augustown could one day become like Mona Heights. It is possible, it is doable. It is going to take political will, it is going to take community will. And that, Mr. Prime Minister, must be given primacy of place.
Okay. I'll give you the last word, Alexander.
Okay. So I want to start from first principles. This won't be long. But when you're devising a strategy for anything, you have to consider your constraints. And you have to have limited goals. Or else you'll be vulnerable to that mission creep I mentioned earlier. Your constraints are geographic, There are constraints on resources, but time is also an underappreciated constraint. And this is why a long-term strategy for anything is never advisable. So here's why I did that part with my fellow panelists. Long-term strategy in any of these communities is doomed to fail. Because the longer you occupy, and I'll use the term occupy, the longer you occupy a neighborhood, the greater the likelihood that an incident is going to occur and something's going to go wrong. And we already see some pushback in some of these ZOSOs, in some ZOSOs. And that will kill the political support that is currently behind the plan. It must be designed to be short-term. That means that before you start a ZOSO, you need to focus on what you plan to do to address the key things that will bring change to that community. And the short-term way of bringing change to the community is not to sit there and try to change a culture, not try to raise a whole new generation of people, but to actually just liberate them where they're now, which is just being stuck in the same place, and giving them the freedoms that other people have. That will lead to the mobility that other people have. So what it means is we have to pre-plan to decide what kind of infrastructure work and regularization work, land tenure work, needs to be done in one of these, in the target community. And going there with the goal of clearing out the active threat, the gangs, making this place safe for civilians, to agencies and contractors to move in, and do that work you pre-plan to do. Then, when you start to see people moving, and new people moving into the area, and some older people leaving the area, and a greater mix of the area, that's when you know a ZOSO is successful. When that community starts becoming more accessible to civilian traffic, rather than locked off in its own world and outside of the place, that's when you know it'll be successful. When you start to see investment in that community, or even talk of investment in that community, that's how you know you'll be successful. That doesn't take very long. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We had so many great questions in Slido, and we do get to save the questions, meaning they don't go away when the event goes away. And Alexander will be on our Instagram doing an IG Live tomorrow. I think it's at 12. I don't know if Aleem, I'll let Aleem confirm that time. So we will take these questions as well, and that will also be on our social media for those of you who are interested, because they really are very pertinent questions. Copies of the report are available. Some of the topics that the questions address are addressed in the report as well, but we do want to engage further on this topic, as that's part of the way that the work is done. Because he was stuck in traffic, as many people were, and I'm so grateful to those of you who are here who made it, he didn't get to bring remarks from our very valued supporter, the European Union. So I'm going to ask if he would come and just do that now and allow us an opportunity to hear from the EU.
Thank you very much. And sorry to be late. I spent 1 hour and a half in the car to reach you, but thanks very much for this invitation. My name is Piotr Byczkowski. I am Deputy Head of EU Delegation in Jamaica. So, as you may know, in 2014, the EU agreed on strategy on public security, which acknowledged that crime and violence were the main obstacles against the full development of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and stressed the need for a regional consensus on public safety having a human development approach. The strategy notes that in situations of insecurity, citizens tend to lose confidence in the state's ability to provide social services, and in many cases, organized crime has filled these gaps. This strategy committed the EU to contribute to strengthen the capacity of government in the region to deliver quality public services that will contribute to achieving public security. To this end, in 2020, the EU delegation in Jamaica committed to supporting the Citizens Security Plan of the government of Jamaica through the ongoing Citizen Security Budget Support Program valued at 20 million euro or 3.5 billion Jamaican dollars. The Citizen Security Program continued to support the government of Jamaica's reform on the approach to crime and violence through coordinated all-of-government interventions informed by evidence-based data and focus on prevention. So the EU support has involved, firstly, providing financial assistance in the form of budget support to enable government agency to deliver core social services and initiatives within the most vulnerable communities. Secondly, providing highly specialized technical assistance in the form of experts, research and training. Do you hear me? To improve delivery mechanism, coordination, quality and effectiveness of intervention to targeted population. And thirdly, providing funds to support civil society participation in the implementation of initiatives that have a deeper reach to beneficiaries.
I'm trying to see if we can get the mic back.
It's okay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So CAPRI research exemplify the EU's approach to facilitating SEO's voice as actors of development, as contributors to good governance, and as voices of the people. The EU stands by its commitments to encouraging an inclusive, participatory, independent civil society and democratic space in partner countries such as Jamaica that facilitate open dialogue with all stakeholders and between civil society organizations. We acknowledge that the findings of this research by CAPRI may not exactly reflect the view of all persons, but we encourage open discourse on this important matter that concerns the very enjoyment of key human rights for the people of Jamaica. In fact, the rights to liberty and security of the person is enriched in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The right to security requires the state to take reasonable measures to protect a person's security. We at the EU respect the fact that each country will decide on the best ways to uphold its commitments to these rights, and to this end, we also acknowledge the role of civil society in being a part of the accountability framework that ensures the protection of these human rights. I therefore take this opportunity to congratulate CAPRI on the achievement of this report and encourage all parties to participate in the necessary actions that will be part of the Great Work for Peace and will contribute to shaping a future that will secure Jamaica's vision of being the preferred place to live. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Charge d'Affaires Bechowski. So I'm going to try to close as quickly as possible, hopefully before we get another blackout. So thank you, SSP Phipps, Dr. Mackay, Ms. Phillips, for your contribution to what turned out to be a really rich and engaging discussion. Would like to commend you for your willingness to engage with CAPRI and the audience. Sometimes we didn't always agree, but your commitment to transparency and dialogical engagement was valued and appreciated. As a reminder, you can find the full ZOSO report on our website at www.capricaribbean.org. I think we also have some printed copies available as well. but they might be limited, but you could always find it online. So in closing, on behalf of all of the CAPRI team, I would like to acknowledge and thank the EU for their sponsorship and support of the report. Thanks also goes out to our Gold Circle sponsors, the good corporate citizens who support CAPRI's work in the public interest throughout the year. If you are a corporate entity who considers our work valuable, please tell us so we can share with you how we can be a part of making it happen. So our next launch is going to be an online interactive dashboard of Chinese investments in the Caribbean region. It's slated for the beginning of July, so you can stay tuned to our social media platforms for more information on that. And for any questions that were not addressed during this session, I know there might have been a few, you can watch our Instagram and X Spaces for our CAPRI chat tomorrow at 11 a.m., as Diana would have mentioned. And we're going to try our very best to get those questions answered for you. So thank you again for joining us this evening. For those of you who are here in person, please do stay with us for our famous dialogical engagements. Just a fancy way of saying you could chat with us, talking about the interesting things we would have discussed, while also perhaps having some refreshments in the back. So the CAPRI team look forward to meeting you all and having those engagements. Thank you again.